Welcome back to section 3. I'm going to skip the fancy diagrams and graphics and begin this class by digging directly into the chart. Here are the 3 periods that formed our volume transition in the last lesson. Each one is color-coded to show the buying and selling bias that occurred while it was being formed. Independent of one another, we get a reasonably good idea of what took place just from the cluster colors. But that visual feedback is only a small portion of the information we have access to in OFA. Each period is made up of prices where trade occurred, and by adding a visual histogram on top of the period, we can see the distribution of volume, or how much volume was traded at each price relative to the volume traded at the other prices in that period. In addition to the overall histogram, we can also isolate specific regions of data within the distribution. This is known as volume profiling. Here, we've replaced the yellow histogram with a more subtle gray color, but we've isolated what's known as the value area in blue. The value area is the region of prices which contains the majority of volume for the entire period, in this case 70%. So if we took the total volume traded in this period and multiplied it by 70%, and then took that total and tried to form-fit it inside the period, these blue prices would be the best fit. In simple terms, it shows us where the majority of trade took place. In addition to the value area, we can see the cluster here in orange. This is also shown in the green blocks of the period, so that's not exactly new information. And we can show the POC, or point of control, displayed here in white. Remember, the POC is the single price which contains the most volume, or what some refer to as fair price. Again, it matches the dark green block in the period, so it may not make much sense yet why we're showing it in white as a duplicate. We'll get to the reason why shortly. And while it's a bit difficult to see here, we can also display the volume weighted average price, or VWAP. It's shown here as a small red dashed line. We'll be coming back to the VWAP soon, and you'll get a much better view of it. But for now, just know that it's another accessible data point that the 1990s candles and bar charts aren't going to provide you. When we put them all together, it looks like this. The POC in white is on top of the cluster. The cluster in orange is on top of the value area. The value area in blue is on top of the histogram in gray. And the VWAP, the little dashed line, is on top of everything. These are just colors I've chosen for the lesson, and quite honestly, we're not even at a point where we need this much information. So I'm going to drop back to just the POC and value area. This will give us more than enough information to begin trading more successfully immediately. Let's break down what the profile and chart period are telling us. The last trade price of the period is up at 46.61 up here. Below that, we can see some light volume in the profile histogram. That's shown in gray, from 41.61 down to 46.58. We can also see that there was a large concentration of volume, shown by the value area, from the low at 46.52 all the way up to 46.57. And within that value area, 46.56 was the POC, or single price where the most volume traded, the fair price. So if I asked you to tell a story about what happened in this period using the volume and price information, what story would you tell? You've seen the slow motion video of this period several times in the last class, so you know the basics. But now you have the volume data to give an even more vivid and informed version of the story. Let's try this. Price opened at 46.53, and a battle began between the buyer and seller. Sellers were able to drop the price to 46.52, but the buyers came back in and tried to fight back up. Now we know there was a fight here because we can see this large distribution of volume. If the move was single-sided without any resistance, there wouldn't be a big bump in the profile. 46.56 became the line in the sand. This was the price that buyers and sellers both agreed was the best price to make trades. And eventually, the buyers punched through 46.57, and the sellers basically gave up. They stopped trying to drive the market back down. Volume, you can see, trickles off into almost nothing compared to the battle that took place down below. The buyers broke out of the value area. And as of the last traded price up here, the sellers appear to have no interest in holding back the upward action. That's the story I see in the price and volume data this profile is illustrating for us. So if we were to run this profile on the previous bar, we should see a similar story unfold, but this time to the downside. In this case, price opened up lower. The battle was formed while the buyers tried to make a move back up. The sellers fought to keep price lower, and eventually the buyers stepped away. The sellers drove through the support, and the last traded price was outside or below this value area. And how about this one? The period opened at 46.71, and it looks like price moved in both directions, with the battle taking place in the middle. Eventually, the sellers push down, but they're unable to close out the period below the value area. There's no forceful, defining move by either side. It's effectively a neutral battle in this period. It's not until the price action that follows in the later periods where we begin to see the market actually break down lower. So this should give you a good sense of some of the logic we apply to the individual clusters. In this case, our logic is telling us that if the periods close outside of value, we want to show them as controlled by the buyer or the seller. And if not, we want to show those clusters in gray. Now, as you get more familiar with the logic options of OFA, you'll find that any of the elements of a period can be used to assign cluster colors. You could use the VWAP, the POC, the cluster itself. There's a lot of flexibility for those willing to dig into the system. Now, the other thing that we can apply this logic to is the actual profile. So in this case, we have the profile color-coded. Instead of a blue value area, the breakdown of price below it has caused the value area to be dynamically displayed in red. If we add a dynamic profile display here, the value area shows up in blue. And of course, that strong buying period, the value area is displayed in green, quickly reflecting that the buyers have taken control. But the real purpose of a profile is not to replicate the display of volume clusters that are already in the individual periods. Instead, we want to enhance the display, provide more information, so we can make better informed decisions. We know that this transition was not made up of a single chart period. In fact, we spent a lot of time in the last class slowly demonstrating how it was the combination of all three of these periods that eventually forced the upside down sellers to throw away their positions. I also had you write something down about common candlestick patterns, that they are usually made up of 3 candles, that they generally don't work very well, but that they can be drastically improved. In the next class, we'll be looking at how we can combine the data points from multiple periods into a single profile, so that we can clearly follow when a breakdown like this becomes a transition like this. I'll be showing you exactly how to trade off scenarios like this one, and you'll see an example trade executed from this chart, which you can study, imitate, and test your understanding with. Up next, section 4.